they beat their peers by 2.3 to 3.8% per year. So that's 89 to 184% compounded. Well, a company that treats its workers well, yes, it's being moral and ethical and kind, but it's being more than that. It's being commercially savvy, it's being financially sustainable. Why? Because it's investing in their most important asset.
Welcome back to the Talk Salon Talk to View. Today we have a very prominent speaker and a professor in economic, finance, and ESG as well. Hello, Professor Edmonds.
Hi Alex, it's great to be here.
As many of my reviewers know that you are a keynote speaker of the ESG conference on the World Smart City Expo 2022. Back then, due to the pandemic and related matters, we only have you online. And now, I personally very delighted to have you in person. So, could you introduce yourself to my viewers?
Absolutely. My name's Alex Edmonds. I'm a professor of finance at London Business School and I work in responsible business, ESG, sustainable finance. But I haven't always been a professor, so my first job was at Morgan Stanley, so I was an investment banker in London. I did sales and trading in New York, so when I give speeches, they do try to be based on rigorous academic research, but also be highly practical based on my practical experience as well.
So my question goes to your book first. So your book titles The Growth Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profits. It is translated into Korean, and now I have your Korean book, such as Pie Economics. Well, personally, I like this title because it directly gives some impression on the pie and economics. So recently, I participated in one meeting, and the speaker on the meeting said that if we go one direction, it means competition. But if we go on each own way, it can be expansion.
Yeah.
Well, I totally agree that one. So we clearly see the recent days many troubles and the concerns partially related with the war and the COVID-19 still.
Mm-hmm.
The various numbers of the forecast of the economy indicate uncertainty, and we will still have to work through the tunnel and far and make people more rigid and blunt.
Mm-hmm.
So in this season, in your book, you highlight about the value and purpose. So I understand that this is not a matter of the allocation of who will have the bigger one or the smaller one. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of the pie growing to increase the share as a whole. Mm-hmm. So can you explain a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. So maybe a good place to start is to explain, well, what is the pie? So the pie is the value that a company creates, and that can be shared between investors in the form of profits or society in the form of value. So that could be fair wages, fair prices, it could be preservation of the environment. So many people think the pie is fixed. And if you think that, you have the competition mindset that you referred to earlier. If I am a CEO, the only way that I can increase my profits is if I can take from other people, pay lower wages, charge higher prices, pollute the environment, and so forth. But what is the idea of pie economics? Well, that's the idea that the pie can be grown. We're not in competition, we work together. Because if a company grows the pie, if it creates value, not only does it serve wider society, it also is good for shareholders, it's also good for profits. So when you think about the term ESG, some people don't like it because they think, well, this is a bit like wishful thinking, this is not serious business. But if ESG involves growing the pie, if it creates shared value, then some of that value goes back to investors in the form of profits. And you quite rightly highlight the difficult times that we live in. Often people think, well, can we really afford to grow the pie when there's inflation or more recently when there's a pandemic? And I think we can. Because what does it mean to grow the pie? It doesn't mean to donate lots of money to charity. That is not possible in a pandemic. But donating money, that is splitting the pie differently. What is growing the pie? That is innovating, that is using a phrase I often come up with, what is in our hand? So what this asks is, what are the resources and what is the expertise that my company has, and how can I use what is in my hand to serve wider society? So let's take the recent pandemic. Let's take the Korean tech company Kakao. So what is Kakao's expertise? Well, that's to connect people with information. Well, how was that useful in the pandemic? Well, what they did was they used their technology to track the spread of coronavirus. They also used it to track which hospitals had a good supply of vaccines so that people could get vaccinated. And the beauty of using that way of creating value is that if you're using what's already in your hand, your expertise, that doesn't really cost you a lot. And so this shows that even in difficult times, it is possible to create value for society. And then in the long term, because of Kakao's reputation, because it helped out in the pandemic, because this is something which will then motivate and inspire employees, I'm working for a company which helps avert this crisis, then in the long term, the company will be more profitable as a result.
Very impressive, that one, especially in the very difficult times. People say that sharing the growing the pie is some kind of the fairy story because they think that it's kind of the expenses. But if you think this some little differently, no, it is not, because it is really profitable. So you mentioned that growing pie means the profitable profits.
Absolutely, and I think this is why it's so important to have the pie splitting mindset, because if you think the pie is fixed, the only way that I can help other people is by giving up profits, and in a pandemic you don't really have profits to give up. But when we recognise that the pie can be grown, then there are ways of helping others which don't actually eat into profits. In contrast, they boost profits because if we're creating value, then ultimately that value will come back to us as shareholders. And while you might think, well, this is wishful thinking, this sounds a bit too good to be true, the heartbeat of my book and the heartbeat of any talk that I give is its foundation based on rigorous evidence. Because you might think, well, Kakao, that's one great story, but did I just handpick that one story because it supports my view? My day job as a business school professor is not to look at one story, but evidence across hundreds of companies in dozens of industries. Is this something that is borne out by the data? And the answer is yes.
Yes. Santa Fe Institute's research team led by Professor Jeffrey West analyzed the data from the U.S. stock market over the last 50 years and found that more than 78% from the 28,000 companies perished by year 2009, and less than only 5% of all companies with a history of more than 30 years. So in the business area, the sustainability, that's so difficult matters. So this is the reason we also need to pay attention to S and G from ESG. We need to have a concrete action for tomorrow. So could you give a little more about with a good evidence?
I think this is a great question, Alex, because when people hear the term sustainability, they think, well, sustainability is about serving wider society and saving the planet. And it is partly, but sustainability is good for business, right? To have a sustainable business is a business that survives in the long term, that doesn't die away, as the evidence of Professor West was finding out. And so this is why whenever I give a talk, I always try to base it on the business case for sustainability. It's just not just a nice to have, it's not just a luxury, it's something that every finance person, every executive should take really seriously because it's important for the company's survival in the long term. And you asked for some examples, and you asked for examples particularly with the S. So one big part of the S, the social of ESG, is a company's interaction with its employees. Now, traditionally, we think our employees are a cost. Right? If we have the fixed pie mindset, let's pay our workers as little as possible, this gives more profits for us. But the pie economics, the pie growing mindset, is if I invest in my employees, they become more motivated, more productive, more likely to stay, and therefore I'm going to be profitable in the long term. Well, you ask, well, what is the evidence for this? Well, I gathered evidence across 28 years. And why is that long time period important? Because, as you said, Alex, some people think, well, sustainability, that's only possible in good times, not in bad times. But my 28 years included the financial crisis, it included September the 11th and the collapse of the internet bubble. And I found that over those 28 years, companies that went above and beyond in how they treated their workers, they beat their peers by 2.3 to 3.8% per year. So that's 89 to 184% compounded. So what does that mean for business leaders? Well, a company that treats its workers well, yes, it's being moral and ethical and kind, But it's being more than that. It's being commercially savvy. It's being financially sustainable. Why? Because it's investing in their most important asset. And similarly, you talked about the G, the governance. There's similar studies I could give you about the long-term returns to governance. So all of these things, yes, it's moral and ethical to care about society, but there's a strong business and financial case as well.
I was very impressive that growing the pie or making a profits is not a matter of the big money or very special technology, because each of the role has their portions to grow the pie. They're on their positions.
Absolutely, and I think this is really important because when people think about the ways of growing the pie to innovate as a company, you might think, well, only if I'm a pharmaceuticals company can I come up with a cure for coronavirus. Or only if I'm a CEO or somebody very senior can I change the direction of the company. But when we think about the question, what is in our hand, that's something that everybody can do, even if you're junior. So I started my career, as I mentioned, at Morgan Stanley. I was right at the bottom, I was an analyst. I thought, I'm so junior, I can't really affect anything. But one thing I did have in my hand was just how I treated other people. So there were still people who worked for me, the secretary, the IT department. When they did a good job, I would say thank you to them. And I didn't say this to be seen as a nice person. I was just genuinely grateful. But because I was so junior, I didn't have my own office. And so I sat in the open plan floor, and so when I said thank you, other analysts would see me say thank you, and they started to do it themselves. And this just then led to the culture of an investment bank, which is often quite cutthroat and aggressive, being more kind and being humane. So even as a very junior person, where the only thing in my hand was my words, just by being grateful to my colleagues, that's something which sparked a general culture of gratitude. So again, when I think about these ideas of growing the pie, they're not just idealistic and nice to have, they're practical and operational, regardless of what type of company you work for and regardless of your seniority in the organization.
So thank you, Professor Edmund. I enjoyed a lot of your conversation today, and I sincerely hope to have you full speeches in person soon.
Absolutely, it was great to be here, Alex. Thank you so much for
Thank you so
tuning in.
much. So how was the interview today? As Professor Edmund said, for the sustainable society, let's look at what's in your hands. Everyone has a part of the society, and we can do whatever. So why don't we become a player who read the change? So I'll be back again with a shared knowledge that connects the world. Thank you.